an auditorium of, I suppose, much larger capacity was as crowded as this one, with also with overflow provisions. And somehow or other, I managed to get myself left out of it. And this evening, due to a screw-up on my part with Thomas Neurath, Thames and Hudson, I have to leave after this introduction and go and join some kind of celebration that he has organized in my honor. But I tried to politely suggest that someone else might carry on in my capacity, but it seems that that wasn't to be the case, and I am very honored to introduce Jim here in this place this evening. I had the feeling that I would like to say that I have known Jim, I think, for nearly 20 years, and that the first time I think we came close to something which could be called friendship was on the occasion of the publication in Architectural Design of Leicester in 1963, when he, I think, felt I answered certain questions about what might have influenced Leicester satisfactorily, and perhaps even more satisfactorily in the article that I wrote on Leicester. And from that point onwards, of course, as with most relationships and friendships, our friendship has been through a number of metamorphoses, and perhaps after tonight it will be the end. But I suppose he has not always approved of the kind of indulgences that I went in for in print and so on. I think it's an obviously corny adage to talk about prophets not being recognized in their own country, and of course I could make that point with much more force if Jim had not been awarded RIBA gold medal, which he has. But of course that by no means exhausts the honors which he's received at internationally, and I thought I might just mention one or two of them because they speak of in a way of the countries to which I think his work appeals most strongly. Above all, the Alva Aalto Medal in Finland, and he is a member of the Academy de Kunst in Berlin, which he once told me has the very sobering advantage or disadvantage of bestowing upon the member the privilege of receiving the black-edged elegant cards announcing the decease of yet one other member of the Academy de Kunst. Most recently, of course, he was the recipient of the much-prized Pritzker Award in the United States, which is somewhat even more beneficial as far as stimulating life, I mean, from a material point of view. And it's thought of by the Pritzker Foundation as being the equivalent to the Nobel Prize or the Pulitzer Prize in Literature, I suppose, with fairly good reason. And then, of course, there was the Brunner Award, and given by the National Academy of Arts and Letters in the United States. It I think, speaks to the extent to which he is perhaps impudently claimed by the Americans as an American architect, and they feel no misgivings about considering him as part of the American National Academy of Arts and Letters. Actually, as far as the Pritzker Prize was concerned, I in fact recommended Jim for the first Pritzker Prize, and which, as you probably know, was taken by Philip Johnson, and after that they didn't ask my advice anymore. Since then, it has been a very distinguished award, above all, of course, by Jim himself and by Louise Barragan. Quite who they would choose next, one cannot say. I suppose that Jim, like most people, has his own share of relics from an embarrassing past. I mean, his brutalist past, I suppose. I don't know how he feels about it. I've never discussed it with him, but I do like certain apocryphal remarks, like, let's face it, William Morris was a Swede. It's a period of his work of which I am particularly fond, and I recently looked in an encyclopedia to discover that apparently on one occasion he also said Stonehenge is much more significant than the architecture of Christopher Wren. I think he would perhaps disavow most of those youthful, exuberant aphorisms today. He would, I'm sure, claim they're all apocryphal. He has, in fact, recently written, we are not much concerned with the imagery of space flight or super advanced technology. Architecture has much more to do with a technology which is normal. I'm against what seems to me banal and arrogant solutions of space frames, domes, bubbles, etc., high-tech solutions which subvert the richness of everyday life. And I suppose that Jim, actually like some of those that are sort of hooked on high-tech, and like many other architects of the last, I would say, 20 or 30 years of the 20th century, have been heavily preoccupied with creating an architecture which is able to contribute to the richness of everyday life, and I suppose is able to be accessible and to communicate to the society at large. It's obviously an extremely difficult problem to solve in this period of history, and I don't think it's going to be stabilized in any way for some time to come. There is a particular moment of Jim's work of which I am personally very fond, which is this moment when, in the mid-70s, he curtails what I think have been an interest in freestanding, brilliant, poetic buildings, and becomes somehow much more concerned with urban context. And I once wrote somewhat marginal essay called Stirling and Gowan, which appeared in the RIBA Journal, in which I remarked on that fact. And of course it was announced by the German projects for Düsseldorf and for Cologne, and above all for Stuttgart, which is of course, and I'm sure you will see tonight, under construction and will, I think, in about a year and a half be complete. It was, or at least it seems to me, as someone who stands on the side in an immodest and embarrassing, in some ways uninvolved position. It seems to me that it was a period when Leon Krier worked for Jim and perhaps played an important catalytic role. Since that time, I feel that Jim has been subject, like I think a great deal of people have been subject, to an unbelievable bombardment of what from one point of view is a kind of marvelous exuberance or proliferation of imagery. I mean, I am of course referring to postmodernism, or what Paulo Portuguese once proudly proclaimed as the end of prohibition. And his work has shifted again from this moment that I characterize, this moment of urbanistic focus in the mid-70s. And it's uncertain, I think, or at least for me, I feel it's uncertain exactly where finally the current direction of his restless and very creative development is going. I would like just to conclude with a brief story which for me somehow is personal and also touching. I went to the Fogg Museum in Harvard, and I saw exhibited there the drawings of Jim's Fogg, and I was very moved by this building because this project rather, because it, first of all, it was inside the building that it was going to be an extension of, so there was this kind of Alice in Wonderland quality, but on top of that, it was a building which reflected current concerns for a certain accessible syntax and rich imagery, but combined that with the very tight and extremely brilliant and elegance of Jim's planning at its very best. And I found this a very moving occasion. I wrote a postcard to Jim there and then on the spot, in which I expressed my reservations about the facade of the building, which is something too detailed and perhaps too delicate to go into at this moment. But in any case, when I met him on a later occasion, he very generously thanked me for the postcard and then said that he's shown it to his assistant Ulrich Schad, and he said, in his words, I showed it to Ulrich and I said to Ulrich, I don't think he's right, do you? And Ulrich said, no, he's not right. And, but the more touching thing is that very recently we met in a restaurant in New York, and he roundly, having invited me to a review in Yale, warned me not to screw it up, like I am doing, of course, this evening. And I rather cheekily, I think I must have been drunk, told him that he shouldn't screw up the facade of the Fogg. And after this encounter, he came over after a very appropriate and long pause and said, "You'll be happy to hear the windows are all lined up now." And I think it speaks to a man who is a great man and who is a great public architect, and it speaks above all to his generosity and to his struggle, and it's the point I really want to make because this is not an easy game, you know, and I think many young people think it is. And I think it's very hard to be a public architect today. I think Jim, for whatever reason, has always been a public architect. I think primarily because of doing university buildings. It's very hard to do significant representational buildings in this period of history which are able to communicate to the society. Whether the Tate is to be such a building, I don't know, but I think that certainly it is a man who intends to make every effort to make it so. And with that, I will leave the rostrum to him. I just want to make one final kind of practical comment, which is that because of the crowd here this evening, Alvin asked me to say that Jim will not take questions after the lecture. Thank you.
Good night.
You can leave now, Kenneth. As Kenneth says, this lecture was in fact prepared for in the fall for a lecture at Yale and then another one immediately afterwards at Columbia, and I haven't actually changed it in any way. There are I would really make slight changes of stress and emphasis to deliver if I'd written it for a UK audience, but as the AA is an international school, then that must surely be okay, and therefore I will proceed. As a practicing architect, can you hear me all right? I really only want to talk about the work in the office at the moment, which I will do, but also I will try and briefly to relate it back to some of our earlier work. Among other considerations, I would like on this occasion to consider our recent work in terms of context, no context or anti-context, and relating this back to all our projects, which I would categorize in verbal terms as being either primarily abstract or representational in style, and sometimes both. Abstract being designed solely to do with the modern movement, and a vocabulary evolved from Cubism, Constructivism to steel, and all the isms of the new architecture, including Bauhaus, International Style, Abstract Expressionism, etc. Representational being designed that is related to tradition, vernacular, history, recognition of the familiar, and the more timeless aspects of the architectural heritage. I would claim that both aspects have motivated our work since we started, with projects being on one side, often to the exclusion of the other. More recently, I think both aspects, extremes, are sometimes being counterbalanced and contained in the same design. Okay, lights off, please. And the first slide, thank you. The Noli plan for 1977, in our piece for the new Noli plan, The Architectural Game of 1977, whereby the then superstars each redid a piece of Rome as a contemporary update of Noli's 1748 city plan, we made a veritable thesis of contextualism, using our buildings and projects designed in the preceding 20 years, integrated or juxtaposed into and all over the Trastevere site. To quote from the text which accompanied our project, this contextual associational way of planning is somewhat akin to the historic process, albeit timeless, by which the creation of built form is directly influenced by the visual setting and is a confirmation and a complement to that which exists. Well, our site at Trastevere, it's the wrong way around. How's that happened? They'll all be the wrong way around. Can you? Sorry. Can we try and make this right? Yeah, that's right. Can you switch to the next one, please? Next slide. That's okay. Can you go back, please? Sorry about that. our site at Trastevere, the Tiber, runs through here. Hope you can see the arrow. And these are some of our projects disposed all over the site. St. Peter's is up here, and the Palazzo Navona is over here. Some examples on the Gianicolo slope down to the Tiber, were the waterside buildings of the St. Andrew's residence overlooking the North Sea or Tiber, or the building at Oxford, which is onto the river at Oxford. The extension of the Villa Farnese with a new wing, which is the Olivetti building, which had an extension to the Peruzzi facades. The Gianicolo and Aurelian walls, were formed by the Dormer Long buildings and the Selwyn College wall buildings. And there were interchanges of monuments. The Garibaldi on a horse was interchanged for the office-made J.S. birthday cake, myself on a marzipan base. And the university precinct had the Sheffield, Leicester, Cambridge buildings around it. There was a larger objective, perhaps over-ambitious, to see if by using our projects only, it was possible to establish the fragments of a city, to see if our collected works in any theoretical way added up to a tentative urbanism. However, to go back to the beginning, in 1950, I finished at the architectural school in Liverpool and came to London. And this was a project from 1951. This project from the early 50s, in fact the year after I got out of architectural school, was a theoretical study for a one-off house and was unashamedly and totally abstract modern. There is no possible reference to anything earlier than the 20th century. In those days, one believed that modern design could do it all. And this village housing project of 1955, whereas in this project a few years later, which was also theoretical and was a study in how to extend the typical English village, but it was representational, that is, traditional, vernacular, and similar in appearance to existing English high street villages, as they have been since medieval times. There is perhaps more system, but the building forms and their clustering and construction are quite traditional and even folksy. Next. Similarly, still in the 50s, this project for a rich man's house in South Kensington was to be built in an area surrounded by Edwardian mansions and was influenced by the form and materials of that context. It is representational and has veneered stone walls and copper roofs. Internally, it is planned with traditional arrangements of conventional rooms. However, the buildings which got built, here the engineering building at Leicester, 1959, tended to be in the abstract category, where the surrounding context had little influence. Maybe here because the site was in the backyard of the university, though we did go higher, taking advantage of the view over the city park, and perhaps in so doing turning our back on the university. We must have made a value judgment that the view of the park was more important than relating it to the campus. What obviously influenced the form of the building most was the abstract language and vocabulary of the modern movement. It has been referred to as Russian constructivist, Frank Lloyd Wright modern, etc., and there may also be reference to 19th century engineering. Again, with the Cambridge Library, 1963, the surrounding context I did not consider to be influential. The site seemed to me to be located in the suburbs and well away from the ancient college courts. The architectural language is primarily abstract and asymmetrical. Inside, it's white architecture, perhaps influenced by the design of contemporary recording studios, where there is an acoustic concern, as there is with a library. However, daylight coming through the entire roof area is probably a development of the 19th century library roof lantern. The St. Andrew's student residence of the mid-60s, what do you do with an open, windswept site? there is no context, only the landscape. And I don't agree with Charles Junk that because it's by the shoreline, it looks like a ship. I'm afraid in these non-contextual situations, and I don't think I consider pure landscape as a context, that I have often too easily relied in design using only the abstract vocabulary. Runcorn Housing in 1967, this also was an open field site, but here we arbitrarily made a context by arranging the housing terraces around a sequence of urban garden squares. The housing is probably too abstract in appearance, but the layout of squares and boulevards is meant to be more representational and familiar. The training school for Olivetti is particularly abstract, and indeed I think it's anti-contextual, though there was a context here, a 1920s Lyons-style mansion in a parkland setting. But somehow the visual juxtaposition of old and new seemed to me more appropriate to Olivetti, remembering the heroic design endeavours and cultural achievements of that company in Italy. This juxtaposition and image of the old and the new may have been a preface to our inclination to try and have it both ways and include representational and abstract elements combined in the same buildings. Incidentally, Seagram's in New York never looked better than when it had stone buildings on three sides, and it would not look as well as it still does if it lost the Rackets Club opposite. The St Andrews Art Centre of 1971 was in the medieval core of the old town of St Andrews, not out in the hills, and it was an 18th century house with flanking lodges that had to be preserved. That was the 18th century house, and these two lodges here and here were ordained as being all absolutely untouchable. In converting to an art centre, we added a gallery, studios and stage in place of the existing school buildings. The wings connect the house to the lodges and the new parts and create an outdoor space in the town. It was both formal and contextual. The Dusseldorf Museum of 1975 is both representational and abstract. As the design for this museum in Dusseldorf, there is a neoclassical type entrance pavilion pulled out from a circular void to symbolize and represent the whole museum in the city block, whereas the rest of the museum, to minimize its impact in the historic centre of the town, was otherwise buried in the city block. Neoclassical, as there were several such buildings nearby, and because I think there is a particular familiar association still attaching to museums deriving from the 19th century. The main building may be abstract, but the pavilion is more representational. That is to do with tradition, history and familiarity, and maybe even with archaeology and memory, as prior to the war a small building of roughly the same size as the pavilion stood in this actual spot for centuries, and within it were contained and exhibited the city's art treasures. Well, now to move to the current situation. The extension of the art gallery and museum at Stuttgart, which is well in construction, this was the third invited competition in Germany, which we did win. It's well on its way up and should be completed in about a year and a half. In fact, the whole competition was for an extension of the Tate Gallery, doubling its size, and a new theatre workshop and a new music school. The old gallery is neoclassical, built in 1837, and was U-shaped in plan. There is a semicircular drive to the entrance, and the midpoint of the forecourt was marked by a classical urn, later in the 19th century replaced by a man on a horse. Stuttgart was bombed out and even more destroyed by the post-war reconstruction. So preservation of as many as possible of the existing buildings was an important requirement of the competition. The old gallery was this U-shaped form, which in the 19th century got extended backwards so which made it into an H-shaped building, and the classical urn in the forecourt got turned into a man on a horse. In our building, it is also U-shaped. It has a circular sculpture court, which has maybe some correspondence to the semicircular drive to the old building. In lieu of the man on a horse, we have a taxi drop-off point, which is a small element in this way. The theatre wing, which is over here, in a sense, replicates the wing of the old gallery. And beyond, you see the existing buildings which were left on the city block, which we preserved all of them. And indeed, with the administration part and the theatre wing, we replicated, in a way, the old buildings. The whole has a kind of axial frontalizing aspect to the boulevard, Konrad Adenauer Strasse, just as the old State Gallery had an axial relationship, and the State Theatre, which is just off the photograph to the right, had that right-angular symmetrical relationship to the boulevard. And we also, by insetting this wing like that, made a possibility of a new plaza developing over here by showing a drawing in the competition stage which replicated this wing, which we'd done over there, and that new plaza would have been exactly on the axis of the State Theatre, which in fact is going to be done. This was a drawing, an early sketch of the concept, which shows the trees on Konrad Adenauer Strasse, the terrace, which is the car parking terrace. It was mandatory that there should be a level of car parking underneath, which coincided with new terraces being built to the right of the picture. The red dotted line is the public footpath through the site, which is also mandatory in the competition, that there should be a public footpath bisecting the site. These are the U-shaped galleries, the circular courtyard. The administration is up here. The public footpath, which is often mandatory in German competition, is a democratic requirement, but not necessarily a good inclusion for preserving the entity of the city block. What we did, we elevated it as it was on the sloping site so that it was above security. This high-level footpath goes around the circular court and down a ramp, and then underneath the theatre arch and continues along on the podium on Konrad Adenauer Strasse. This is a section, this is the old gallery and the new bridge and the car parking underneath, with the theatre entrance underneath the theatre arch at that point. The entrance to the gallery here, the big lobby window to the entrance hall. This is the public footpath going up the ramp through, around the circular court and up to the top of the site. It is a sort of collage of new and maybe old elements. Some people think there are Egyptian cornices, but there may also be constructivist canopies. And it all may, I hope, evoke an association of museum. And in that respect, I always find the 19th century much more convincing than 20th century. I hope it looks like a museum, or will look like a museum. It is under construction, and this is a view from underneath the theatre arch towards the old Staatsgalerie, with the public footway ramp going up over here. This is the platform on top of the car parking underneath. And inside there are columns, which are sort of giant columns. We had to save money at one stage in the project, and to do that we reduced some of the spans across the big spaces at the lower level by including columns, which I now have no qualms about. Indeed, I think it's been a great asset introducing these columns into the lower level of the plan, because they do articulate the space more than if the space had been empty with them. Some of the columns are fake. And the reason why they have this top, this spread top, is that we couldn't, in the ideal spacing of the columns, we couldn't get them to exactly line up with the structural thrust from above. So we gave them a sort of a mushroom top to carry the offloaded thrust, and that was applied to all of them. This is a detail of the model. This is the entrance to the Tate Gallery. This is the big glass bay window, a taxi drop-off point. These columns are in fact not columns, they're trees, but we had to chop the tops off in order you could see the architecture of the model. This is the footway up and around top of the building, and then this is the upper level terraces behind. And this is the building is completely veneered in stone, which is still a Bavarian tradition. It never died. It's actually not a material which is not all that expensive, relatively speaking, in Bavaria. And we have alternating courses of sandstone and travertine, which come from nearby, from an area called Bad Cannstatt, which is 10 miles north of Stuttgart, where there is a kind of hollow mountain entirely scooped out in a vast space within it, in which this kind of quarrying takes place. This outfit existed in the pre-war days, and the entrance to the site out in the trees is marked by 6 enormous columns, which were part of Hitler's reconstruction of Berlin, which for some reason never got sent, and therefore were never paid for. And they mark the entrance to the site. When you get inside this hollowed-out mountain, it's full of the most dramatic kind of machines and water squirting things and tremendous noise and activity. What happens is they have chunks of stone the size of that space there, which they put into machines during the daytime, which have many blades, and the whole of the daytime is set up jigging these machines. And at night time, they go, at 6 o'clock, they go away and press the buttons, and these machines cut through the night with water being shot onto the stones. And when you come back at 8 o'clock in the morning, all the stones are laid out in kind of sliced through like salami. And that fantastic noise and unlivable kind of thing that's going on with many of these machines all over the place takes place at night, and this resetting up takes place in the daytime. There are fantastic things in this place. I mean, there's a building there within the mountain which is entirely made of marble, where everything, the hinges, the skirting, the doors, the door knobs, the ceiling, the picture rails, everything is in marble. There's nothing which is not in marble. Even the windows are sort of some sort of translucent marble. It's an unbelievable object. It was a building made as an administration for the kind of to bring clients to, etc. It was a building from the 1930s. At any rate, the lower plan shows the exhibition hall over here, the circular garden, which is sculpture court, and the large lecture theatre. The entrance is at this point. The public ramp goes up, through, and then around and above. You have the entrance to the theatre underneath the theatre arch, which is here, and you go up the ramp which divides the theatre from the gallery to the theatre level above. Between the two, the theatre and the gallery, is the cafeteria, which is used by both. It's into this space which we have put these columns, and also into the lecture theatre, where we also have put these columns. The back area is all depot storage and non-public spaces. The entrance is here, the taxi layoff, entrance to the taxi drop-off, upper ramp or upper staircase onto this upper level podium. This is the bridge which connects across to the podium being built on the other side. In the entrance hall, you have this circular pavilion, which is where the information counter is, where catalogues and things are sold. And then you have the way through here into the temporary exhibition room. The main galleries are U-shaped on the floor above. This actually is the not the circular garden. It is the pavilion where the information is sold. And this is the Stuttgart office standing around Dracula-wise in the columns. We really made a big mistake, I think, on this building scale-wise. It was the first building we designed in meters, but I think, in fact, was really designed in feet, because if I go forward, that space you've just been looking at is this space here. Anyway, this is quite a nice thing for me, because I've often been criticized for producing terribly small buildings. Americans come over and say, God, I went there and it was so small. And they won't be able to say that any longer. This is a full frontal up view, which sounds sort of rude, of the entrance of the building. Underneath the canopies, glass canopies, and through the revolving doors into the interior. And I'd like to quote from Charles Jenks, writing in Architectural Design, who, when he is not rabbiting on about postmodernism, can be a most perceptive critic. He says, these drawings accentuate the dualisms inherent in the design, the juxtaposition of rectangle and circle, frontality and rotation, axiality and diagonality, and also the attitude of collage, the idea that the new buildings should both support and contrast with the existing urban fabric. The juxtaposition of primary colour canopies against a more neutral masonry background heightens the identity of each element. They are, as it were, distilled canopies of steel and glass collaged onto a Schinkelesque background, which conforms with the local Stuttgart fabric. What is the machine aesthetic doing on a Schinkelesque facade with such obvious discontinuity? Perhaps there is here an allusion to the two West German realities, the cultural and the technological. And perhaps the building can be seen as a systematic confrontation of these two cultures, with neither of them gaining an easy and predictable victory. With this supposition in mind, we might compare these drawings to the ad hoc amalgams of Viollet-le-Duc. The latter were also rational confrontations of two separate realms claiming authority, the traditional and the technological, and they were also experienced as incongruous, even today, by such critics as John Summerson. The scheme is more provocative than the straightforward contextualist project that it first appears to be. It does fit into the fabric and knit it together, but with a richer language than the neoclassical. It speaks as dual structures do on two quite distinct levels, offering a reconciliation with tradition and context on the one hand, and a confrontation of cultures on the other. Both opposed meanings are here ready to set off quite divergent readings, a divergence which has already occurred in Germany with some force before the first stone is dressed and I-beam welded, unquote. Now, that last comment is related to the fracas with which this scheme has provoked with the German architects, though there do seem to be as many for the project as against it, particularly the younger German architects seem to be very much in favor of the project. However, the story is that one famous architect-engineer at a public lecture put two slides on the screen, one of these of the Stuttgart project and one of Auschwitz, and said these are the same, which, coming from a German, I find splendidly over the top. The plan of the gallery level, you come up from below on the lift and ramp into this sequence of galleries, larger and smaller galleries, which connect to the old building. And this is the upper part of the information shop and the entrance lobby. And back there you have a small library. And this is the theatre in line. You come up the ramp into this mid-space between the workshop theatre and the rehearsal theatre. And the space going off to the right is where you have shipping and receiving and costumes and things. And that is a building which kind of replicates the flanking old houses on Eugenstrasse. This is meant to be a sequence of well-proportioned rooms which are at the same level as the existing gallery, so that there is no knowledge of crossing from the old building into the new building, no window to tell you of the outside, no physical or psychological break in continuity in moving from one museum to the other. And in this respect, there may well be an influence from the 19th century as a prototype. This is the Schinkel-Altes Museum in Berlin, which is also a set of rooms as against a freely flowing space, and also is a expression of monumentalism, which is, I always think, necessary as landmark buildings in the city. The plan is similar, in fact, but the internal space here in the Altes Museum is a room and not a void. Well, now we move on to the next project, which is for the Wissenschaftszentrum in Berlin. This is close to the Mies van der Rohe Museum and the Fahrenkamp building, which is the Shell House building, a very distinguished building in the 1930s, which is over here. And then back here is the Stuhler Church. Otherwise, it's kind of bomb-flat areas. What we are trying to do with this scheme is, in a way, to make the fragments of the city disposed on the site, which I'll come back to. The next but one German competition in 1979, we again won. It has to be completed by 1984. This is for the upcoming 1985 Interbau, where instead of concentrating all the commissioned new buildings in a single area as it did previously, the idea this time is that they will be sited in different parts of Berlin, where each can be beneficial, even remedial, to an immediate neighborhood. This building is for the Bonn government, and it's really a think tank, but called a science center, an institute for deep thinking on matters of ecology, environment, sociology, management. We also had to reuse the huge old Beaux Arts building, which somehow survived the war. This was actually built by the same architect who built the Reichstag. Having destroyed so much with the post-war reconstruction, they now in Berlin want to hang on to everything which is old and survives. Reading from our competition report, objectives. 1. The primary need is for a great multitude of small offices, and a particular concern was how to find an architectural and environmental solution for a program composed almost entirely of repetitive offices. The typical office plan usually results in boring box-like buildings, and the banality of these rationally produced office buildings may be the largest single factor contributing to the visual destruction of our cities in the post-war period. So I made an early decision that whatever, we would break away from the office block stereotype. And I said to those in the office working on it, let's make a clustering of buildings. Take, for instance, a long bar, a cruciform, a half circle, and a square, and juggle them together with the old building. Quoting again from the report, our proposal is to use the 3 institutes of the centre, management, social, and environment, plus the element for future expansion, to create a grouping of 4 buildings, all of which are similar but different, and the architectural forms may evoke familiar building types, with each institute having its own identifying building. Each institute has 2 directors with complementary staff, and a binary organization seems fundamental. As all the buildings have symmetrical planning, allocation of rooms should adapt to this dual organization rather well. The buildings cluster around an informal garden with a single large tree in the center preserved. The loggias and arcades, which overlook the garden, also relate to the cafeteria, the conference facilities, and the old building. These were early sketches which I did of the groupings. Freestanding in the garden is the library tower. These are the actual drawings which went in as the competition drawings. Freestanding is the library tower, with a reading room at garden level. We hope to make a friendly, unbureaucratic place, the opposite of an institutional environment, even accepting that the functional program is for a great repetition of offices in a single complex. Actually, the whole grouping can function as a single complex, as each building is joined at every level, unquote. The irony is that whilst we have greatly varied the building form, we have retained a characteristic of repetition in the wallpaper-like application of windows. A decision in regard to the typical office was that each room should have a single centrally positioned window with flanking walls onto which bookcases could run and on which curtains could be drawn, etc. Externally, walls are rendered in puts, stucco, with alternating colour, pink and grey per floor. This project has now reached the working drawing phase, but its start date has been set back 6 months into the following year's financial budget. We're hoping to start mid this year and still get it finished by 1984. The next project is for the Turner building at the Tate Gallery. L-shaped buildings seem to be our current formal obsession, and this is one of them. As you know, the new building is the building in white to the right of the existing Tate. This is the river and the entrance portico. There is a lodge over here which is very undistinguished architecturally, but which is very important contextually, which makes a balancing act with this building over here, which has a smaller scale piece sticking out, not on the model. And these two actually create a kind of symmetry about the existing Tate. Bullinger Street, which is closed in our project, runs up through here. I'd like to read from the press release which went out when the project got all its approvals a few months back. I should say that this building has been funded by the Claw Foundation, and it is for the housing of the Turner paintings. As you may know, Turner, when he died, bequeathed to the nation his personal collection of paintings, some 300 oils and 19,000 watercolors. I can't imagine how anybody can do 19,000 watercolors, which the ungrateful nation has ever since ignored. But the Claw people have come along and are putting the money in for the building. So reading from the press release, the Claw Gallery will be the first element in the development of the Queen Alexander site, Queen Alexander Hospital site, for use by the Tate Gallery. And it was essential to position the new building in a way that would not inhibit further development. The whole of the Queen Alexander Hospital site, which is this area over here, has been given by the government to the Tate for future expansion in that direction. This is the Vicar's Tower over here. The lodge I've just been talking about is in the front here, and the corresponding building is over there. Now, in our proposal, we retain the lodge, and we retain the central building of the hospital, which is kind of quite an architectural, quirky, attractive building, and also another building which has a nice closure to one of the streets back off John Islip. Otherwise, we propose that all the hospital buildings should probably go. Our building is the new building is L-shaped. It comes out from the side of the Tate at exactly the point in the plan where they wanted the connection, and it turns in behind the lodge, which is on the river frontage, and it creates a new kind of terrace garden and landscape garden in front of it. Certain visually important buildings of the hospital complex are to be retained and integrated with the new building. The lodge on Bullinger Street, Millbank, will be retained. At the moment it is used by the Army Medical Corps, and when available at Tate will be ideal for garden functions and tea rooms with offices and VIP accommodation above. We will also retain the hospital entrance building on Bullinger Street, which may overlook a future sculpture garden and be used as a library, bookshop and for archives. Other remaining hospital buildings will be used for offices and storage. The retention of the lodge, with its counterbalancing relationship to the medical college to the southwest, preserves the contextual setting of the Tate and maintains the symmetrical balance of the gallery about its entrance portico. This is the lodge you've just been looking at, and this is the sunken terrace with approach across the garden. Bullinger Street has been taken out, and the Tate Gardens extend right across to the lodge. This is the entrance of the new building, and this is the big window to the Turner Society room, which overlooks the garden. The addition to the old building comes out from behind this pavilion corner, which exactly replicates around the corner. So what you see here is exactly the same thing facing the entrance around the corner. The reason why you step down into the terrace is because the gallery level in the new building is at exactly the same level as the Tate, and by the time you stack underneath it lecture theatres and entrance halls and so on, you actually have to depress downwards the entrance level because there's not enough headroom to have those sort of accommodations in the lower level. Up top here are curatorial rooms, and then the service rooms way up there. Nevertheless, the Claw Gallery will have its own separate identity and be clearly seen from Millbank across the gardens of the Tate. The existing plane trees will be maintained and new lawns laid across Bullinger Street to the lodge. This is an axonometric down view of that terrace and the pergola, which is actually a sort of screen with seats and things in it, and the entrance to the new building here, the Turner Society bay window, and so on. This is how you step down from the garden into the terrace. The new building is designed as a garden building, like an extension to the country house, with a pergola, lily pool and paved terrace with planting and sheltered seating. The building will be L-shaped with a gallery wing connecting to the existing Tate and immediately behind the Tate's pavilion corner. The shorter wing returns towards Millbank and the river on the line of the existing lodge. Setting back the new building and matching its parapet to that of the Tate allows the pavilion corner, with its greater mass and height, to maintain its architectural significance and leaves the symmetry of the Tate frontage undisturbed. Approach to the new building will be either from the front steps of the Tate or through a new gate in the garden railings of Millbank and along footpaths to a paved entrance terrace. This sunken terrace relates the corner pavilion with the entrance to the new building and will be a gathering place for visitors, and as it faces south, a good place for sandwich lunches. The increased height of the new building, with an upper level of administration rooms adjacent to the lodge, reinforces the feeling of enclosure at the entrance terrace and complements the pavilion corner of the Tate. The entrance to the new building does not face towards the river, thereby avoiding competition with the entrance of the Tate, but faces sideways towards the Tate portico and the shoulder of the Tate. An architectural conversation between the new entrance and the pavilion corner across the terrace is intended. That's the lily pond. These are the seats alternating in here with mounting boxes. This is Portland stone, exactly the same as the Tate. The Portland stone panelling with infills of stucco and brickwork. Crazy paving terrace. The existing cornice, as seen from Millbank, is carried across the principal facades of the new building, and stonework details of the Tate walls are carried partially onto the new building. The garden facades have panelling of stone with rendered infill stucco. Towards the lodge and the hospital building, these panels are infilled with brick to match the existing buildings. The colour of rendering will be chosen to mediate between the Tate stonework and the brickwork of the lodge. The height of the pergola on the terrace relates to the Tate's rusticated base. This is the backside, and is again a kind of full frontal up view of the service facade. The service non-public facades are in light-coloured brickwork with coloured metal window elements, and they are utilitarian in design compared to the elaboration of the public facades around the garden. The upper level of the new building contains the galleries, and these are at the same level as those of the Tate. This is the point where we had to make the connection from the Tate. You come into a sequence of galleries, smaller and larger, and this is the entrance from the new building lower down. You come up the staircase and round back into the Tate galleries. This is the upper part of the Turner Society room with a view of the garden, and these are administration rooms. The upper level of the new building contains the galleries, and these are at the same level as those in the Tate, allowing uninterrupted flow of visitors to and from the main building. There is a sequence of rooms, smaller and larger, related to the scale and grouping of Turner's pictures. Daylighting will be through roof lanterns. A centrally placed bay window in a small room off one of the galleries is a place to pause, to sit and rest one's feet and enjoy views into the gardens and across the river, particularly the diagonal views towards Vauxhall Bridge. This was requested by the trustees of the Tate that there should be somewhere that you could see a view of the river in the gallery sequence. And we came up against that kind of big problem with the curators, that to have direct daylight coming into these gallery rooms upsets all the lux levels. So which they wouldn't allow. So in fact what we've made is a kind of small room off the gallery room into which you walk and sit down and rest your feet. Big fun, going all over the place. Non-exhibition spaces are located in the lower level, including the entrance hall, lecture theatre, staff facilities, paper conservation, plant room, etc. In the entrance hall there is an information and cloaks counter and a showcase containing the Turner relics, his model ships, palettes, glasses, snuff box, etc., as well as the staircase leading to the galleries up. You enter here. This is the information counter. Lecture theatre is through here, and the Turner Society room is here. It's thought that in the evenings when the galleries are closed, there will be kind of sherry and cucumber sandwiches and intervals at the lecture theatre and promenading between the two spaces as a kind of evening activity. Down here you have the toilets, cloaks, and back here you have a school's entrance which corresponds to the educational facilities in the basement of the Tate. And that school parties can come into the new building by that sort of back entrance, as it were.
Where's the snuff?
The what?
Snuff box.
Oh, they're in that showcase just there. See. It's on line with the staircase. There is also a public reading room, which will also be used by the Turner Society, that overlooks the garden, and it is fitted with a small servery where drinks and sandwiches can be prepared for evening functions using this room and the adjacent entrance hall, perhaps related to evening lectures. The lift is tucked in behind here, and is a lift used by staff, paintings, and the public or handicapped. This is the main staircase which comes up, and you return on this gallery, sort of fitted into this very high vertical space. This is the entrance over here. That's the way into the Turner Society room. And the Turner Society, the secretary is on the half level above, and that's her window up there. And looking in the other direction, you have the entrance and the information desk through beyond the lecture theatre, up the staircase, and then into the gallery. The way to the garage is signalled by this very large dropped window dropping out of the vertical slot of space, and you have a view into that of the kind of galleries beyond. It's a kind of signal as to where the main spaces are. The Architects' Journal asked Sir John Somerson to make a criticism of this scheme. He said in the journal, it says, Sir John Somerson, curator of the Soane Museum, and himself an RIBA gold medalist, is intrigued by Stirling's design. He told the Architects' Journal, "It's a funny building, but no funnier than Soane, who would have enjoyed that deep slot that the stir goes up in, and so would Soane's friend Turner. I like the complexity, the play of layers. It's full of intriguing allusions, 1930s modernist, German neoclassicism, low-tech, and so on. The great shock is the Newgate-type prison wall cutaway. Wait a minute, the great shock is the Newgate-type prison wall entrance cutaway with a pair of scissors. It's all a bit mad, which is what people say about the Soane Museum. It's just the thing for the Tate, and the sooner it gets built, the better." This is that bay window overlooking the river, the entrance, the Turner Society reading room, or social room, and then the bays. That's the secretary's room to the Turner Society off the upper half level. This project has now gotten through all the approvals with reactions from the Victorian Society, the Edwardian Society, the Fine Arts Society, the Historic Preservation Society, and it's due to start building about May of this year and be completed by 1984. This project has both representational and abstract design elements mixed throughout, though in particular the public garden facades are more representational and the back non-public service facades are more abstract. In the current issue of Architectural Design, titled Freestyle Classicism, edited by Charles Jenks, this Turner project is comprehensively shown. With some exceptions, I'm not very happy about the company we are with, nor do I think it very attractive listening to Charlie continuously and compulsively swallowing and regurgitating his golden egg. Just as many years ago we declined being categorized as new brutalist, so now I must say that I don't think our works attempt to be postmodernist, whatever that may be. And the next project is for the Fogg Museum at Harvard in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and it is also an L-shaped building. Up here, this is Harvard Yard. Up here is the existing Fogg building with Carpenter Center, Corbusier's building to the right. GSD, the architecture school, to the left. Immediately alongside our building is the Queen Anne fire station. And over here is Memorial Hall, which is a 19th century enormous cathedral-type building. And back here is Lowell Manor, kind of apartments of the 1930s. That sort of completes it. The new building for the Fogg Museum is to be built at Harvard, and is to house the ancient and oriental collections, and it's being done in association with Perry, Dean, Stahl and Rogers of Boston. The context here is everything is different. The fire station is Queen Anne, the Fogg is Queen Mary, Memorial Hall is 19th century Victorian, and so on and so on. So that in this bizarre situation, I thought it was essential that the new building should have its own identity and not necessarily relate very specifically to any of its adjoining ones. This is a photograph of the existing situation. This is the existing Fogg, that's GSD, the architecture school. Behind there's a building by, I think, IMP, I'm not sure. This is Alison Burr, which is lecture halls which were built in the 1950s, which are in fact going to be pulled down to make way for the new building going on this site. And this is the very first drawing which was done on this project. It's a JS sketch, a genuine, not for sale, unattractive architect's doodle. As opposed, I'm showing it so that you all should know that all those fancy drawings, like some of the ones I've just been showing, are not the original drawings, as you all know, when designs are initiated. This is, what does it show? It shows a lot of the things which still have happened, the kind of sequence of galleries as kind of separate rooms. That's not quite as strong as it was in this sketch. The connection, the bridge connection, the entrance positioning, which is more or less where it is on that drawing, and so on. And the concern about levels and making the galleries connect to the gallery levels of the fog, so that they line up, you cross on the horizontal. This is the new building, which has this side onto the Queen Anne fire station, which is just in front of the drawing, and the bridge crosses to connect with the gallery levels, the upper gallery levels in the fog, and that coincides exactly with the upper gallery levels in the new building. The building is split down its middle, with on one side all the galleries. The galleries are on the inside of the city block, and the other side are the administration rooms, which these are the windows to. These are rooms to the curator's offices, seminar rooms, tutorial rooms, secretarial rooms. And these are all very small rooms, and Fogg being as specific as it is, they're all different sizes. So there's no logical module for these rooms to be put onto. So we therefore adapted the Berlin solution of having a central window placed in the office, which allows book stacks and so on to go onto the walls. But because all the rooms were of different size, it resulted in this chaotic relationship of windows. The bigger windows here are to the bigger rooms, the smaller windows are to the smaller rooms. It's absolutely functional, logical. But it produces a kind of chaotic, this is the elevation, this is what Kenneth is referring to. So to reorder that situation, we have these very strong horizontal banding of alternating colored brickwork surfaces, so that the kind of alternation of these, the stripiness overcomes the kind of disorder of the window arrangement. And that is shown in this study, where you see the wider windows have vertical sliders, and the narrow windows, and the narrow windows have vertical sliders. That's right. The horizontal windows have horizontal sliders. You slide in the least dimension. And these are alternating green and pink brick banding. These are some of the brick samples which have been built on site, all of which have been rejected, not by Harvard. In fact, they liked some of them, particularly the kind of the red and the grey, which they saw as being very appropriate, the Fogg being a red building and GSD being a grey building. But they've been rejected for technical and for reasons of lack of contrast, in a sense, because we're now opting for a blue and a pink combination, which isn't shown here. Our problem here was that of the bridge. The bridge may or may not be built. It's absolutely a 50-50 possibility, because Harvard has that usual problematic relationship with the city, and building a bridge across the road will be maybe considered by the community and the city as making a barrier, a wall, a separation, and therefore it should not be done. Of course, it's logical that the Fogg and old Fogg and the new Fogg should be connected by a bridge which is also a galleria. But what we had to do was to make a facade which could stand on its own, which is the middle picture, without a bridge, which has a big window, or a facade which could have the bridge plugged in at a later time, 5 years later. And in both situations, the facade, the entrance facade, would stand as being okay. This is, you enter through this glass lobby between the columns, into the entrance hall, which is here. Inside the entrance hall there are 4 fake columns, which are light columns. They illuminate the side walls at night time. And beyond you have a central staircase, narrow, well, it's about 8-foot wide staircase, which rises up the entire height of the building, and you go left into the administration or right into the galleries as you proceed up it. This is the section through the entrance hall, which has very high level windows which will illuminate the ceiling but not so much the floor level. You go down staircases behind the columns which take you into the lecture hall, which is in the basement, and as you have 2 staircases you can operate an in-out movement on either side. At the top level you have the upper level gallery. And going further into the building in section, you have the staircase rising up between. Off to the left are the administration rooms, the curatorial rooms, the secretarial rooms with the windows overlooking the street. And on this side you have the galleries, and below you in the basement you have the lecture theatre, temporary exhibition room, 2 levels of ancient galleries. On the right hand side, the top one being rooflit with lanterns. The staircase is entirely rooflit with glazing at the very top. This is a perspective of the entrance of the lecture theatre, which is more like a cinema. These are the structural columns which support the staircase width going up through the building. And over here where there's a display of some Rothkos, and otherwise it's very straightforward. The plan, you enter the building by going down a few steps to a lower terrace, about half a metre. This again is to relate to getting the upper level gallery at identical level with the Fogg. So when you stack the things underneath, instead of having the usual monumental situation of the steps up to the public building, you have steps down, which somehow I think actually is more refined than steps up. Then you have the entrance hall, and you proceed through on the staircase up to the building. Straight ahead also is the temporary exhibition space, and the circular little room is a bulletproof glass supervision control thing, whereby they can supervise people coming down the staircase, out of the lift, which you have to come through here, or from the temporary exhibition space, and they can press buttons and shutters and things will drop, and you won't get away with the priceless jade, unless you have it in your pocket, of course. And behind is the offloading from Cambridge Street, which comes in at the diagonal because that's the size of the truck. You can't get a straight angle in. Then you back into the loading bay here, and all this area behind here is storage and depot storage stuff with the service lift, which runs up and services the galleries above. The circular columns are structural to carry the bridge when the bridge gets plugged in, but they're also air intake shafts to the mechanical room, which is underneath this triangular space in the basement. And this is a picture of the entrance hall on a sunny day with light coming in up top. At night time, when that's dark up there, this whole flank wall is floodlit because on the reverse side you have a translucent glass panel running the whole height of these columns, which with fluorescent, 4 banks of fluorescence in them, which completely floodlight that side wall. And otherwise you don't have lighting in the entrance hall, except you start getting light coming down from the staircase, and that is floodlit through the roof, with lights on the roof down the cleft of the staircase, a la the lighting through the lobby of the Alto building in Massachusetts. And then through there is the lift, which is slightly out of the way, intentionally out of the way. At the upper level or the middle level, you come up the staircase, you either go right into these ancient galleries, which are a set of rooms, or you go left into the staff quarters. This is reception, Friends of the Fogg Society, and these are tutorial staff rooms all the way around here, and then storage rooms back there, upper part of the entrance hall. I show this because, again, it's for me a sort of prototype of a linear sequence of galleries where the problem is to accommodate larger gallery spaces and smaller rooms. It's the Soane's plan for the picture gallery at Dulwich. This and the Artist Museum I show in relation to these other museums because, not because one's cribbed them, but because one is sympathetic to the 19th century prototype which exists in these two buildings. This is a model of the upper level galleries where there's a lantern with daylight being bounced in onto the walls and also being bounced in on these splayed sides into the middle part of the room, so you get a diffusion of light inside the room, not entirely on the walls. I'd like to quote from the New Boston Review a recent, very interesting article by Gary Wolfe, who deals in equal measure with the new American Academy of Arts and Sciences designed by Cullman, McKinnell and Wood, and art design for the Fogg new building. Incidentally, this collage of quotations is a way in which I can pretend that I'm not really talking about myself, which is somehow maybe less embarrassing. To quote, "We have lived with the villa and the palazzo for a long time now. From Pliny to Palladio, from Potsdam to Princeton, the suburban villa has offered retreat from the urban world to a contemplative natural setting. The villa we know today tends to be informal, like the life it houses. The palazzo, by contrast, is the prototypical urban building. Hemmed in where the villa is freestanding, the palazzo is recognized not by its roof, but by its wall. Its architectural assignment is not to dissolve the barrier between inside and out, but to establish a strong separation between them. Where the villa turns outwards to its open site, the palazzo is inward-looking. Where the one may be casual, the other is disciplined and formal. The first belongs to the garden, the second to the street. These buildings are in our memories. We recognize them readily, whether they are historical monuments in Europe or everyday structures in Cincinnati. Their very typicality may have rendered them unremarkable, while their age and tradition made them appear old-fashioned, if not obsolete, especially in the last 50 years when architects largely abandoned such prototypes. Recent decades have given Boston and Cambridge a collection of landmark structures that consciously avoid fitting into any such comfortable recess of collective memory. It is therefore of some interest that the two latest architectural projects of note in Cambridge are a villa and a palazzo. In the Fogg project, Stirling has recovered the wall separating inside and out, and the primary opening in the wall, the front door. Where the Academy, with its more open site, utilized a loose assemblage of discrete rooms and open spaces around the central hall, the Fogg edition isolates and emphasizes every part of the building without a trace of the freely flowing space of modernity. The disconnectedness of this planning serves a very different purpose from that of the Academy, for here the goal is to establish a sequence of spaces that will continue via a bridge over Broadway into the galleries of the old Fogg, to conclude in the Fogg's gracious Renaissance Revival courtyard. The dramatic proportions of Stirling's vestibule and stairway establish a momentum which, with allowance for browsing along the way, will carry the visitor to the top floor and back to the front of the building to cross into the old museum. Stirling has designed a building whose culminating space is across the street in another structure. This link across Broadway is problematic. However, he has designed an addition that will work with or without its bridge. No doubt he had in mind the fate of Michelangelo's plans for the Lawrenceana Library in Florence, a building Stirling's powerful spaces recall. There is the final room which visitors would have reached after passing through the tall vestibule and the long narrow reading room, which was never constructed, leaving the existing manner spaces with a brilliant, if unintended, tension. End of quote. Well, I'll buy that. Though I don't think that I had the Laurentiana library in mind when we were designing this building. I would like to think that this project combines the monumental and the informal, and also the abstract and the representational. It's gone through a long on-again, off-again, on-again process with Harvard and the Fogg, but now it's on again and is due to start on site this month. We have a tender and its contract is being let. Well, the final L-shaped building was done in association with Ambrose and McAninny of Houston, and is the Anderson Hall, is the extension of Anderson Hall, a school of architecture. This project is to double the size of the School of Architecture at Rice University. The original campus by Cram, Goodyear and Ferguson is from the 1920s in a sort of Venetian Florentine Art Deco, and we were asked to work within a limited range of bricks, panel tiles, pitched roofs, etc., which we thought was reasonable for this eccentric but elegant campus, where there are many arcades, marble balconies and fancy spires. The site plan, you've just been looking at this entrance building over here, and they have a very large central garden around which the existing buildings are sited. And the Anderson Hall, the School of Architecture, is this L-shaped building at this point. And we're proposing to extend it by putting another L-shaped building on, which kind of makes a kind of handshake, a sort of a clasp, and creates a small outdoor paved garden, which is in otherwise a rather very open campus. So you get an intimate outdoor space as well as an extension of the new building. This is a library built in the 40s, which is quite ugly, but the thing that's characteristic about this campus is that the buildings tend to be linked by quite elegant arcaded colonnades, at least in the central buildings. This is Anderson Hall as it was, with very kind of mean and cramped studios, central corridor, and this is Anderson Hall as it is now, with a new wing over here and much larger studios in the old part and also large studios in the new part, also with administration, etc. And the two pieces are connected together, are stitched together by a sort of galleria which runs from the old entrance to the new entrance on the other side of the building. We found in analysis that as many students came from this direction to the old building as came from that, so we provided a new entrance on the other side, which is an entrance of equal measure. And the two entrances are marked by spires on the roof which allow light down into the entrance halls at both ends. In between, you pass through over a galleria which has an overlook into a jury room on the right and overlook into an exhibition space on the left. The exhibition space further looks out into the garden. This is an axonometric drawing of that splint. This is the old entrance and the new entrance up here. The gallery above, the jury room, and the exhibition space, and the way out on a kind of outdoor stage into the garden, which is out here. Of course, funny old columns stand around because they were essential to keep the building up, or what was left of the building up, during the construction phasing. Detailed plan. This is the new garden which is created. The trees were existing. We lost two of them in the building process. The biggest one remains and seems okay. This is the kind of gallery, jury, circulation spine which holds it all together, and that's the old building and the new building. The School of Architecture is an L-shaped building, and we are extending it with another L-shaped piece. The interlock is joined by a surgical splint, a galleria of circulation, a core binding the two pieces, old and new, together, and connecting the old entrance with the new entrance at opposite ends of the splint. These entrances are lit through glass spires in the roof. That's the glass spire over the old building. This is the facade of the old building with the colonnade connecting to the library and a new spire up above the roof, which coincides with the new spire up over the entrance, which is down here, of the new facade of the new building. This is the new building, which picks up the colonnade arcading instead of the square windows of the old facade. And it creates a result, this kind of thing sticking out, which is on the axis of the circulation core running back. And this is one of the lower level studios through here, and these are offices over there. The Galleria overlooks a new exhibition space on one side and a jury room on the other. This is and it has sliding walls which divide them. This is the jury room through here, and this is the exhibition space with no exhibition in it. And the Galleria passing over between the two of them. But you can separate the spaces off at the lower level to have privacy. This is looking down from the Galleria, into the exhibition space and out beyond into the paved garden, which is out there. The existing building is connected with a colonnade to an adjoining building, and the new L-shaped extension creates a three-sided courtyard, a new sheltered garden in an otherwise very open campus. That garden is in here. That's the old colonnade, and that's the old wing up to about there. And this is the new wing, which comes around and encloses the garden, the fire exit, and window on the staircase. And there's other buildings nearby which have sort of similar kind of things happening to them over there. This is a picture of the opening ceremony in September last, where there were seats in the garden and speeches made. And finally, I'd like to quote from the inaugural speech which I had to make at last September when the building was opened. Quote, the year 1980-81 was the year in which we declined invitations to take part in the architectural games, namely BEST, the design of supermarket fronts, organized by the Museum of Modern Art, New York, House for Sale, organized by Tate Gallery, Chicago Tower, a rehash of the famous competition, and the Venice Biennale, which is the Venice Biennale. I think the time for these architectural games is, for the time being, over as a result of these and other similar games in the last few years. Oh dear. I think the time for these architectural games is for the time being over. As a result of these and similar games in the last few years has become repetitious and trite. And I go on, blah, 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 to say a few words about how I see the current architectural scene. To go on quoting. You have to switch. Historically, the quality of the art in the architecture, both at the time of building and in retrospect, is remembered as a significant element. However, with the advent of modern architecture in this century, sociological, functional and real estate values have come into ascendancy. Ironically, with the recent loss of certainty in modern architecture, the influence of welfare state and hard-nosed commercial standards is also, I believe, declining. And the more ancient desire to see buildings wherein a primary objective is for them to appear beautiful and appropriate in their context is returning. At least that's what our clients seem to want now. Having stressed the importance of the art, perhaps I should say where I think it's at. For many of us working with the language of abstract modern architecture, Bauhaus, international style, call it what you will, this language has become repetitious, simplistic, and too narrowly confining. And I, for one, welcome the passing of the revolutionary phase of the modern movement. I think the mainstream of architecture is usually evolutionary, and though revolutions do occur along the way, and the modern movement was certainly one of them, as was the time of Brunelleschi, nevertheless, revolutions are the minority occasions. Today, we can look back and regard the whole of architectural history as our spectrum, including most certainly the modern movement, high-tech and all. Architects have always looked back in order to move forward, and we should, like painters, musicians, sculptors, be able to include representational as well as abstract elements in our art. So, freed from the burden of utopia, but with increased responsibility, particularly in urban and civic realm, we would like to look forward to a more liberal and equally committed professional future, producing work perhaps richer in memory and association in the continuing evolution of a radical modern architecture. It is, of course, very heartwarming to receive gold medals and Pritzker prizes, but the best prize of all is to get another building built, far more important and substantial than any award. So on behalf of Michael Wilford and myself, I would like to thank all of you that have made it possible here. Thank you, end of quote. Now, so finally, as a coda, I would like to show a preview of our building for Columbia University in, we'll go back, in New York. Columbia University is the campus designed and built by McKim, Mead and White, where the upper part of the campus was originally intended as a park, but became built upon, even in McKim, Mead and White's days. They actually extended it further so that the buildings run right up to the top of the city block. Broadway is on the left, and in the center of the campus is the Low Library, which is this large building here. A phenomenon about the campus is that the steps to the Low Library, which come up here, really are making a complete rise of one floor for the whole of this upper part of the campus. On top of this, you get a terrace, which is actually one floor level above grade, which has kind of hard surfacing and sometimes soft surfacing between the separate buildings. A characteristic of McKim, Mead and White's buildings is that the whole layout is made up of separate, articulated, similar blocks. The space between the blocks is a gap, and that gap runs out onto Broadway or to the other side, wherever. There's a deliberate avoidance of making a continuous wall effect onto the street, though the buildings are so similar and they are quite high. I think they're about 13 or 14 floors. So they do, in a sense, constitute a wall, but they constitute a wall with gaps. The gaps usually being about the sort of same width as the buildings. Well, the chemistry department, which we are extending, was originally in this building here, called Havermeyer Hall. And when McKim, Mead and White built onto this part, they extended a wing up here on the Broadway flank. And later, after McKim, Mead and White had left, a gymnasium, post-war gymnasium, was built underneath this top left-hand corner. The Aldo Jurgler new building is over here. The School of Architecture is here. So our problem is to build over the gymnasium. Well, our problem is to create an air rights building over a gymnasium underneath. We can't send columns down through the gymnasium because the gymnasium is cut up with ball games and so on. So we have to use what was left for us to build over. Well, now this is a plan of the site as it is now. This is Havermeyer Hall, which was the old original McKim, Mead and White building, and this is the extension to it, which was also built by McKim, Mead and White, called Chandler North. The gymnasium is underneath here, and the engineers for the gymnasium left 4 columns, 1, 2, 3, 4, 4 gigantic columns in which you could build another building on top, another multi-story building above. So we have to kind of do a kind of air rights engineering type building over, picking up on these structural things which were left. But in analysis, we found that we also could use this flank wall of Broadway, that we could take structure down through this flank wall and not interrupt the gymnasium. And we also could use the Havermeyer service yard. This space here is a depression down to the natural grade level, where it's full of junk, where the trucks come in here and they deposit all their cans of chemicals and stuff, and this is a real junkyard down here. And the trucks pass out the campus to the other side. There's underground roads and passages in this area. But we found that we could put structure down into the flank edge of this depressed service yard, in addition to the 4 columns. This is a view of the top of the terrace. These squares here are planting boxes where they've tried to enliven the big, huge terrace, which is here, with kind of planting in these big boxes, because otherwise it's completely tiled, brick, hard surface. Very vast kind of terrace area. Windswept, nobody goes there. It's the kind of unused top left-hand corner of the campus. Well, we found that when we analyzed the problem, that if you were to continue the wing of the chemistry building along the flank, which would be the logical thing to do, then because they wanted so much accommodation, you would in fact end up by joining the end of Pupin, which is this physics department here. So you would in fact completely fill in the whole corner. So you'd have a building wall stretching from here right round to here. And we wanted to resist that. We in a way wanted to keep going the kind of gaps which McKim, Mead and White had left in the original planning. So to do that, what we did was we slew out a kind of half the building, or more than half the building, across the diagonal to line up with the flank of the depressed service yard and create a gap through with a view across to Riverside and the Hudson and the Gothic towers of those churches over there, which is necessary, I think, because part of the thing is to get breezes and air movement into the campus, which does happen through these gaps, and if you closed it, it would not. Also, at this point, there are very fine views of these towers and the Hudson Valley from this upper-level terrace. Now, what we did was we put new structure down into the service yard. We put a giant column here with a girder wall which stretches right across and picks up the girder wall, which is between 2 of the 4 columns which we were given. So you have two girders, one diagonal, one regular, on the campus side, and on the Broadway side we really make a masonry wall which kind of fairly corresponds to the McKim, Mead and White walls, masonry walls, which are on Broadway. This is the Aldo Jurgler new building, and then these are buildings which were built in the latter part of McKim, White, Mead and White's extension of the campus. And this is a plan of the building, which this is a structure down here. There's a giant kind of complicated column, a new service freight elevator which goes down to the service yard, a girder coming across here which connects up to that column underneath, this wall running onto the flank, the Broadway flank, the gap preserved in a slightly different way, and in this corner, on this particular level, on one level only, a kind of special room which is a kind of social lounge reading room. Otherwise, the typical floor is made up of laboratories, instrument rooms, which are these spaces here, more laboratories and offices. It's an accommodation entirely made out of laboratories, instrument rooms, storage rooms, and offices, with a lot of requirement for very heavy ducting. These are the vertical ducts going down, which what we do is we create a false floor above the gymnasium so the horizontal ducts turn off without going through the gymnasium underneath. It's a very complicated engineering type technical problem. This is an upper level, a service floor, with the service floor is on the roof, and that coincides with the service floor in Chandler North and also in Havermeyer. These are the empty service areas up on the roof level. Now this is a view from the campus with the service yard down here, this enormous column going up supporting this girder wall which runs across onto the other girder wall which is connecting the two old columns. So you have a kind of one girder wall diagonally resting on another girder wall. And then up there you see the social lounge, the reading room, with views into the campus and out over the Hudson. This is Havermeyer Hall, the flank of Havermeyer Hall, and part elevation of the Chandler North extension. This is the elevation to Broadway. This is the original McKim White building. That's the first extension, also done by McKim White, and this is the extension which we're doing. There's a kind of slight increase in height, but we come up more or less to the height of Pupin, which is also McKim White building, running in the other down the side street. This is the gymnasium in the base, and these are the windows to the offices and to the laboratories which overlook Broadway. This is the big reading room. This is an axiometric up view of that building on Broadway over the gymnasium, fire escape staircases down, and the gap between the new and the existing building. And this is an up view axonometric from the campus side. This is the Havermeyer service yard down here. This is the new structure. This is the girder wall going across onto this girder wall, which is between the existing columns. And this is the social reading room, the entrance down underneath the splayed diagonal wall. There's the view from Broadway without any motor vehicles. This is usually full of motor vehicles here, dashing up and down. There's the gymnasium underneath. This is the existing Pupin, old Chandler North and Havermeyer beyond. The reading room and the gap between the new and the old building. And this is the view upwards from the campus side of the entrance down here underneath the splayed diagonal girder structure, which is going down into the service yard. I should say that in a way the service yard now has been kind of screened out by this splayed piece of building, and also the very large area of terracing, campus terracing, has been reduced by it as well. This is Pupin North here, and the old Havermeyer building just showing left of the picture. So I don't think I'll comment about this building. This is just a sort of preview. It's now been approved. The schematic design has been approved, and we've been instructed to go into design development, which is what's happening right now. We don't really have a building program yet, but they don't seem to be too concerned about the money which is necessary to make the construction. Okay, thanks so much.